Welcome back. So in our last video, we made our first component with JSX, and now we're going to look into JSX a bit more and see what it can do. Our objectives are to first write JavaScript inside of the JSX. Secondly, to use a style attribute in JSX so we can actually have some styling now in our component. And lastly, to add a class name attribute to JSX. Now let's go look at some code. Our goal now is to add some styling to this component that we used in the last video. So remember, we've got a React component called pet that returns a div, and inside of that we've got Moxie and our image. So this is JSX that we're going to add some styling to. Right now the component looks like this when rendered. So it's just a picture of Moxie and then the name Moxie. Let's make it look a little nicer. So first of all, we're going to include this CSS file with some classes. And the one thing that'll take effect right away is this ID app, which is used right here by this div, ID app, is going to get some styling to use flexbox. We'll display flex, give a flex direction row, and justify content center. So let's see how that looks when we add the CSS. So here I've added the link for my CSS. I've called it firstcomponent.css. And now you can see that we've centered the image and the H2, but not much else has changed. So let's add some styling to make this look a little nicer. Specifically, we're going to make the font here different and a little bigger. We're going to give this a border and a background color. There are already some classes that we can use in the CSS file, so let's take a look. In here, we've got a card class. And the card will give a background and some layout properties to the div inside of our component. Again, I'm not going to go over every line, but some of the highlights here are that, again, we're using flexbox so that everything inside is a column. We're going to justify content center, line item center, and we're also going to give a new font to the card. How do we actually use that in our component? Well, let's go back to the JSX. You may assume that we could just say class equals card here. And for most attributes in JSX, that's true. But the problem here is that we're using Babel. And remember, Babel compiles from JSX into standard JavaScript. And the problem there is that Babel doesn't know the difference between an HTML class here and a JavaScript class. So in order for this to work, any reserved keyword in JavaScript, we have to name it differently if it's inside the JSX. So if I don't want to use a JavaScript class here, I need to name it class name. Let's take a look at the website and see what it looks like now. Now our card styling is being applied to our component. So it looks like class name worked. Let's see what else we can add. Now if we take a look at our CSS, we'll see that we also have this name class, and that gives some styling to the title Moxie. So let's add that in as well. I'll give this H2 a class name equal to name, and then take a look at what that looks like. And now you can see name is applied there as well. So that's great. We've added some classes, but let's also look at how we can add styles programmatically through JavaScript. In order to add some styles, I'm going to create a little more content that we can style. So I'm going to give Moxie some hobbies. Let's make an H5 for hobbies. And then underneath that, I'll list her hobbies. So Moxie likes to, first of all, sleep. And second of all, to eat. So let's see that content. Okay, so we've got hobbies and sleep, eat down here, but it doesn't look too great. So let's add some inline styles. Before I get started, I should mention that if you're coming from a different framework or just HTML, you've probably been told that inline styles are basically the worst thing ever. But in React, they're actually not so bad because the way you build a component, everything is bundled up as one. So your classes, your component code, and your inline styles are all in the same place. So you don't have the same confusion in HTML when you might have a class doing one thing and an inline style doing the other, and it's very difficult to debug. So keep that in mind as you code. Inline styles in React are actually not a bad thing. All right, how do we add styles? Well, first of all, in React, we can add a style using JavaScript. So we're going to give it a JavaScript object that represents our CSS. I'll just do it first and then explain. So first of all, let's make a li style, and I'll set it equal to font size of 1.5 EM. And then I'll use that in my LIs. And as you can see, our LIs are now larger because of that font size that we added. So how's that working? Well, first of all, a style always takes an object which represents our CSS. But this isn't CSS, this is a JavaScript object. So normally in CSS, I'd write something like font-size. But since this is an object and we want to keep with JavaScript standards, we're going to use camel case instead. Also notice that this is a JavaScript object, so we can't just use 1.5 EM by itself. That wouldn't compile in JavaScript. So we have to always remember to quote any strings that we use here, like 1.5 EM, or if I wanted to make it 40 pixels or anything else, it would be in quotes, whereas CSS, it wouldn't be. I'll change that back. Okay, so that's how we have to format our style object. But what's going on down here inside the JSX? Why do we have another set of curly brackets? In JSX, anytime you include curly brackets, you're saying, I want to evaluate JavaScript here. So when you include style, it accepts an object, and this li style is an object. But in order to evaluate that object, we need to put it inside of curly braces again. So using curly braces to evaluate JavaScript isn't just limited to styles. Anywhere inside of JSX, we can use it to evaluate some JavaScript code and have it be part of our JSX. So here I'm going to evaluate some JavaScript to say 5 + 5, and also maybe I'll say green plus blue. And I expect these two things to be evaluated and rendered as part of my HTML. So let's take a look. As you can see, I've got 10 green blue now as part of the DOM. So it's a pretty powerful tool, being able to evaluate JavaScript inside of our JSX, and we'll see it being used a bunch as we go. Let's finish this off by getting rid of this here and adding some styles to our title. So I could create an object up here separately, but I could also write my object right in line. Remember, the first curly braces are saying evaluate JavaScript, and the second set of curly braces are creating an object which defines my styles. So I'm going to make the font size here 2 EM. I'm going to give it a margin of, let's say, 2px to get rid of that default margin. And then let's take a look and see what it looks like. All right, there you go. So that's our finished Moxie component, or pet component. It's got plenty of styling, and I think it looks much better than before. So next up, we'll do a little exercise to help solidify some of these concepts we just learned.